never owned it. He left it in his will to his son. And Isaac never owned it, and he left it in his will to his son. And they passed down the title deeds of that land from generation to generation. What faith! To leave somebody something you haven't even got, but something you've been promised in a covenant. That's faith, isn't it? I've only made a will for what I've got, which isn't too much, but I've made a will. And I've left it. But I haven't left anything in the will that I haven't got. Abraham did. Isaac did. Jacob did. Those three men are tied forever into God. And I'll tell you something else. Jesus said they're still alive. They're not dead. I've seen their tombs in Hebron, but they're not in the tombs. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are alive this morning, if you believe what Jesus said. And they'll be alive at the end of history. And one day the Bible says we shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom and have a banquet. And I can't resist adding what I said earlier. Jesus will be the waiter serving the meal. It says that in Luke's Gospel. What an amazing sight. Sitting down. Abraham, hello, and Isaac, yes, and Yaakov. And Jesus says, here's your meal. I just can't cope with that. I feel a bit like Peter. You'll never wash my feet. No, come on, let me serve the meal, Jesus. No, Jesus will say, I'm serving. It's your banquet. Well now, so God was selecting these three men and their descendants. This covenant was in Canaan, the land that was promised to them. And it had a national and an international aspect. The national aspect was that God would give Abraham's seed, even though he was so old and his wife was way past childbearing. God said, I'll see that you get seed, and I will give you a land in which they can live forever. That was the promise. That was the covenant. That's the national side of it. And I've just written down the little word ownership, because the ownership is not conditional. It is unconditional. And it will forever and ever belong to the Jewish people. But there was an international side to it, and that was that through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And again, I must repeat a few little things that I've said earlier, yesterday or the day before. This is what philosophers call the scandal of particularity. This is God's way of working, to choose one people and through them bless all the others. Now, we had 3 children, and I used to bring them candies every Saturday, just a little family custom. And I could do it one of 2 ways. I could either give all the candies to one of them and say, share those with your 2 sisters and brother, or I could give them each a bag of candies. In the second case, we had peace in the house. In the first case, we had arguments. You got one more than me. It's not fair. But that's the way God chose. He didn't choose to bless the Americans and the Chinese and the Indians and the British. He said, I'm giving it to you Jews. Now you share it with everybody else. And that's why we are all dependent on the Jewish people. We owe them so much. We wouldn't have a Bible but for the Jewish people. There wouldn't be a church but for the Jewish people. Everything that I value most, I owe to the Jewish people. That's how God works. I'm sure you know the little poem, How Odd of God to Choose the Jews. And then another poet added another verse because he thought it was too short. How odd of God to choose the Jews, but odder still for those who choose the Jewish God and scorn the Jews. And yet many Christians do that. At best, ignore the Jewish people. At worst, well, better not say at worst. Jews have suffered more in Christian countries than in Muslim countries. The Holocaust happened in a country that was half Protestant and half Catholic. It's to the shame of the church that the church has caused the Jews to suffer so deeply and so greatly. Shame on us. International side of the Abrahamic covenant, then, through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. But there was another little codicil to God's will here. He said this, everyone who blesses your descendants, I will bless. But everyone who curses your descendants, I will curse. For God is a God who curses as well as blesses. He's a God who hates as well as loves. He's a God who kills as well as heals. He's a God of goodness and severity. And we need to remember that. Our attitude to the people He chose will determine His attitude to us. Bless a Jew, and the God of Israel will bless you. Curse them, and you'll be cursed. I have seen that happen in my lifetime to a nation, to individual people. The God who made the whole universe is the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's tied Himself to them. And we need to remember that constantly. Now, was there a proviso? Was there a condition? The answer is yes, there was. The condition for His descendants was that they be circumcised. That simple operation of the removal of the foreskin, significantly from the organ of reproduction, they would bear in their body that special mark down through the generations. And Abraham was told, if any of your descendants refuses to be circumcised or is not circumcised for any reason, they are out of the covenant. It was a firm condition, and it was the only condition that was made. Now, I put it this way, as I've put it already to some of you. Every Jew who is circumcised is carrying the title deeds to the promised land inside his trousers. That's the truth. If he bears that mark, then he is a descendant of Abraham who belongs to the land, and the land belongs to him. That's at the root of the problems in the Middle East right now. But we must listen to what God says and not just what people are saying about the Middle East. I've told you that on the international side, we're blessed if we bless Israel, and we're cursed if we curse Israel. How long does this one last? Well, it's permanent. It's forever. And the purpose of God in making this covenant was that He now had a channel through whom He could communicate to the whole world. And He placed them in the middle of the world in the promised land to demonstrate how blessed people are if they live God's way, and how cursed they are if they don't. And the Jews have been a demonstration of both down through the centuries. No nation has been more blessed than the Jewish, and no nation has been more cursed than the Jewish. They are a living demonstration of God